awkward conversation to have. Well, it's not for me, but it may be for some of you. Can we please talk about white people and black people and race and weirdness? I don't mean critical theory. I'm kind of tired of talking, and I feel like it's still in the news so much. It's got to be talked about. But white paternalism of white progressives. Now, this gets back to earlier in the show. Some of you may not have heard it, and I want to recap this very, very quickly. There are two things you should know about because they are interrelated. They are connected to a degree. One is a phenomenon I have long been. It really, when I realized there was a phenomenon, because you know the experience. You hear a word and then suddenly you hear it everywhere. It's like, what is that? It's called the Bader-Meinhof effect. It's when when you hear criticism of someone or something, and then suddenly it's everywhere, and you realize that it's all pervasive, or you hear a word and suddenly the word's everywhere, or someone makes a comment on someone and you can't stop seeing that thing they commented on or experiencing. I think it's the Bader-Meinhof effect. And then there's the majority illusion, which has actually been studied, that essentially people make their personal independent decisions based on what everyone else in their community does. And oftentimes that then it causes their community to make decisions that are disproportionate to other communities, where they're making decisions that in the global network of systems deviate from the global systems, but it's because of a pervasive effect in their community, the majority of illusion. And they think that they're in the majority in their community, even though actually they're not. They're not in the majority. They just assume they are because everybody in their community is doing it. And oftentimes their community embraces the majority illusion because of the Bader-Meinhof effect. That gets me to white progressives who have become very paternalistic of the black community. I told you guys the story I heard the other day of a diversity group that fell apart because a white woman in the diversity group was lecturing the black women in the diversity group that the black women who believed something were only believing it because of they had internalized white supremacy. Let me say that again. Diversity group falls apart because white woman begins lecturing the black women that they believe something because they've internalized white supremacy. And the black women were largely offended that the good white liberal woman would tell them how they're supposed to think as black people. It is a bizarre new phenomenon. On social media, white progressives are the only group in America that opposes photo ID for voting. The only group in America that opposes photo ID for voting. 60% of black people in America support photo ID. 55% of white progressives oppose it. Why do white progressives oppose photo ID for voting? Because they think it suppresses the black vote. They think that black people can't get driver's licenses or state photo IDs. They have become paternalistic toward black people. Take the story I mentioned earlier at IKEA in Atlanta, Georgia. I guarantee you it was white employees were offended that IKEA in Atlanta decided to have a Juneteenth celebration, and instead of serving Swedish meatballs, decided to serve fried chicken. And employees complained that clearly there was racism involved, that they would do this. I guarantee you it was the woke, hipster white employees who invaded Atlanta. Rich, progressive white people in this country somehow think that they should shape society for all of us, and they should do so in ways that actually aren't good for society. For example, rich white people tend to believe that abortion is a-okay, hunky-dory, don't worry about it. It's your choice. You live your life as you see fit. Go for it. Live your best life now, folks. Joel Osteen says so. But what actually happens is a poor person can't go out and just have a lot of sex and a lot of abortions. It doesn't work that way. It may for a white person without consequence. A rich white person can smoke weed all day and be just fine because they got a trust fund. Poor person can't. But it's the rich white people who want to legalize weed. And it's the rich white people who think it'll help the black community by then allowing them to sell weed. You know, it was the rich white people in Evanston, Illinois that decided we're going to have reparations, and the way they're going to have reparations is they're going to tax marijuana sales. Didn't go over well in the black community. It was the rich white people who decided to structure reparations in ways that gave money to black families, but then wouldn't allow them to actually spend the money they thought was necessary to spend the money, or how they wanted to spend money. They put so many controls on it. It's a level of paternalism. It is, a friend of mine texted me, the soft bigotry of low expectations. But there's another angle on this as well. Fatherhood. I mentioned this last week during Father's Day, but the rate of collapse of fathers in the black community is a disaster for the black community. It really objectively is. More than 50% of children in the black community are born in fatherless homes. And there is a direct correlation to fatherlessness and all sorts of social ills. There just is. It's just the truth. It really is. Now, when you talk about that, though, now with white people in the progressive community, what do they tell you? It's critical theory. And critical theory is the issue. And you're not allowed to point out that it is the collapse of the family, of the nuclear family, that's causing problems. No, you're not allowed to do that. What are you supposed to do now? You're supposed to say, well, it's the systems are racist, and it's the systems that collapse the family. It's the systems that did this, that, and the other. It makes no sense. There's no data to back it up, but it's what they are convinced of. It is what they believe. They are the hyper-paternalistic relationships that are within white academia, overwhelmingly progressive, making decisions to impact the black community, doing what they think is best for the black community in ways that actually aren't. And you notice what actually happens with the policymakers now is you've got a lot of rich, white, secular people who inhabit nonprofits funded by the left who want to tell black people how to live. And look at the conversations you can't have now. I am not allowed to have the conversation about gun violence. You're not allowed to have it either if you're white. I played for you the clip from CNN yesterday. I don't want to play it again. 7-year-old black girl killed in a McDonald's drive-thru in Chicago, Illinois. They were targeting her father. She was the victim. The father survived. But you can't talk about gang violence. No, you're not allowed to. You're not allowed to talk about it. You're not supposed to talk about it. You're not allowed to have talks about, there really isn't a gun violence problem in the country. There's a gang violence problem in the country. You're not allowed to talk about it because you're white. They have precluded white people, by the way. It's not black people doing this. It's the good, rich, well-meaning white people who value niceness above everything else, who have decided you're not allowed to talk about these issues. But these are the issues that have to be talked about to fix society. You've got to talk about the issue of fatherlessness. You can't hide behind systemic racism. Systemic racism is not preventing people from getting married in this country. Systemic racism is not preventing people from buying guns in this country. Systemic racism is not preventing gangs from killing each other in this country. But rich white people live on social media, and they believe these things are true, and you can't dissuade them from them. They take on an epistemological belief that this is the way everything works, and they're doing more harm to the black community than any Republican ever did. Donald Trump was actually very good for the black community. Donald Trump got more of the black vote than Mitt Romney or John McCain in his second election. You know why? Because a whole lot of people got out of jail thanks to his prison reform package, and then they got jobs. And now the Democrats have been cratering the economy by keeping everything locked down and then blaming gun violence on everything. We're seeing a profound shift in this country as white secular progressives self-select themselves to be the standard bearers for the way the world works, and they don't really know how the world works. I'm sorry, y'all. Listen, one day I want to be on every radio station in America so that I can afford a private jet. I don't need to own it. I'll take net jets. I would love to be able to fly on a private plane. Why? Because I really get tired of walking to the airport and having people recognize me and yell at me. I'm in this convention hall right now in Port Phillip. I'm literally talking to you people on the radio, and Phillip is having to shoo people away from me who want to come talk to me. Well, I got headphones on and I'm talking into a microphone. Maybe I'll get there one day with private jet. Maybe so. Actually, I'd really like to have a house in Hilton Head first. But nonetheless, I digress. But I don't want to live in that world. That's really my point here. I've got friends who live in an elite world of multimillionaires and billionaires, and they cease to relate to people. And they think the world relates to everyone the way it relates to them, people with a lot of money who live in coastal enclaves, in mansions, surrounded by other rich people. And these are the people who tend to fund the think tanks on the left and the right, and hire the lobbyists and set public policy. And they're less and less in tune with America. They're less and less in tune with the way the world works. And the problem that we're seeing increasingly is that what they had then decide must work is the way we're all supposed to talk about it. And if you talk about it any other way, they define you as a racist or a bigot or you name it, when really they're the ones who are completely out of touch with the way America works. We probably need to have more discussions about gang violence in this country, and we need to have more discussions about fatherlessness in the black community in this country, fatherlessness overall, the collapse of marriage in this country. We should. All of our societal problems would be improved if more kids had active fathers in their lives. But you're not supposed to talk about that. That's why we must talk about it. We must force ourselves to talk about it. We must be mindful of the fact that more and more the people who set the news, the people who write the news, the people who talk about the news, the people who appear on the news, the people who pontificate about the news, the people who set the policy and hire the lobbyists and decide what culturally we should accept, they're the most insulated people in the world, and they're the ones who live on social media and believe that if it's on Twitter, it must be true.